one here.
To be
Where's
in
one?
Where's one?
I think in order.
This is one.
This is one, good.
Good, I found my
2,
chair.
3, 4.
Huh? Hello.
That's good.
Hello and welcome. This is Connecting the Dots, seminar brought to you by the AutoBeat Daily publication. I'm the editor-in-chief, Bill Hampton. I want to welcome you all today. I'd like to thank our sponsors. There are 4 of them who are making this possible: Eaton, GHSP, Hella, and ZF. Thanks to those sponsors for making this possible. This is a symposium about connectivity. I hope you're in the right place. This is a subject that is becoming very, very hot in the auto industry. It's been referenced almost synonymously with autonomous vehicles. They're really 2 different things, and it seems like the subject of connectivity is rising and becoming more urgent and important every day. Now, what do we mean by that subject? There are a lot of definitions. I think one would be connectivity is the ability of vehicles to trade data between themselves and or their surroundings. Now, where is that happening, or why would you want to do it? Convenience is one of them, and you see some applications right now that define connectivity in that way. These apps that find parking spaces for you while you're driving and arrange to save a spot for you is an example of that. Wireless software updates to your car, something that Tesla has pioneered, is another example. Apps that help you find a gas station, may tell you the price of the fuel there, or help you locate a charging station if you have an electric car. That's an example too. A little further down the road, and of great interest to the government, is safety. There's an ability to reduce the likelihood of crashes by enabling cars to alert each other to where they are and what they're doing. This would lead to a smoother traffic flow. It would reduce emissions and improve the air quality. There are a lot of things down the road. Farther out, maybe you see something like a health monitoring of the driver on the fly. Or my favorite is a dynamic insurance rates. This would be kind of calculating your insurance cost as you drive and how you drive. So you might get merit points for being courteous and using your turn signals, and demerits for speeding and hogging the left lane on the highway and things like that. We have a lot of areas to cover here, and fortunately a wonderful panel to do that with. I want to introduce that group in just a second, but our objective here is to kind of help you see what connectivity is all about, where it's going, where the issues are, where the developments are coming. So let me introduce briefly this panel to you. I'm going to do this in alphabetical order, which is not the way they're seated, so if we can get everybody to wave a little bit, that would be helpful. Chris Baroni-Bird. There we go.
Morning.
Chris led Chrysler's fuel cell program in the 1990s, and from there he went on to head advanced vehicle concepts at General Motors. His next stop was Qualcomm, where he directed strategic development for several years. Chris currently focuses on sustainable mobility solutions as co-founder of an organization called afreecar.com. I encourage you to look into what that's all about. Second, Shomut Ghosh. There we go.
Morning.
President and CEO of the North American operations of P3 Group, which is an international consulting and innovative engineering solutions company located in Aachen, Germany. He oversees P3's connectivity, mobility, and autonomous driving work in the U.S. Next, Patrick Huprick, President and CEO of FEV North America since 2013. FEV is also based in Germany, provides a broad array of automotive engineering services in such areas as electrified powertrains, vehicle connectivity, and automated and autonomous driving systems. Kevin Kerrigan, who you may have seen, he's no stranger to our panels. Kevin heads the automotive office of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and he's the senior automotive advisor to the state of Michigan. His job includes a heavy involvement in the state's support of the many autonomous and connected vehicle demonstrations and test facilities in Michigan. Kevin's worked in the auto industry for 35 years in executive positions involving technology in Asia, Europe, and North America. Next up is Brian Murray.
Hello, morning.
He is Director of Global Safety and Security Excellence at ZF. In that capacity, he's responsible for leading and executing system safety and product cybersecurity strategies, processes, and technologies. And finally, Jörg Weisgerber,
Hello.
CEO of Hella Electronics for North and South America. You probably think of Hella as an innovative lighting supplier, which it certainly is, but it also is very involved in electronics that involve sensors and other devices that enable a vehicle to collect the information about itself that becomes the stuff of connectivity. Before we get started, a couple of things. We're going to try not to use a lot of jargon, and there's plenty to be had in connectivity. You're going to hear two terms, V to X, which means vehicle to everything else. V to V is connectivity between vehicles. And then there's DSRC. I have to write this down because I never get these letters straight. This refers to dedicated short-range communications. This is one technology that enables connectivity. So without further ado, let's get started. And we'll start with Kevin. If you could just give us a kind of overview of connectivity and where the action is, what's going on these days.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks, Bill. Thanks to AutoBeat for having us here today. And this is a fantastic panel. I'm glad everybody's here. It's quite an esteemed group from the automotive industry. As Bill mentioned, I work for the state of Michigan. Very basically, our metrics for the automotive office are jobs in Michigan and direct investment. So we stay very close to the auto industry, to the OEs, and to the tier one suppliers and others in looking at industry trends and technology trends. For the past 5 years, the whole industry's turned upside down. We started talking about autonomous vehicles, about connected vehicles, and that path has been quite interesting. It's been very different, and I'm not quite sure anybody can truly tell you where we're going. But one thing that I've seen lately is that the talk about driverless vehicles, about autonomous vehicles, has really slowed a little bit. I think there's what I call autonomous fatigue in the industry because there's so many promises have been made for cars that will drive you around and you can sit in the back and have a barbecue or play the guitar or whatever it is you want to do. We're a long way from that, and I think everybody's starting to realize that that is an aspect of the new era of automotive and mobility that is going to take a while. we weren't talking so much a couple of years ago about connectivity. That has now, it's sort of turned upside down. I think connectivity, and the reason for this discussion is so important today, I think, is starting to really take hold, and some very, really interesting opportunities in the industry that are going to hit us very soon. Bill mentioned a couple of the ones which I like, parking, for instance. There's statistics out there that say that when you drive into a city, about 30% of the people are driving around looking for parking spaces, and that's why you've got so much congestion. These are the sorts of things that I think we have the technology now to change that very quickly. But when we look at connectivity generally, I think that there's V2X. What does that truly mean? It means connecting to everything, but we're going to connect to cars, will talk to cars, cars will talk to infrastructure, and interestingly, cars will talk to you. I mean, they're going to start knowing what you're thinking, where you're looking, what your attention on the road is. One of the big barriers to these types of technologies in cars is that when you're driving, you have to be focused on driving. So we're talking about lots of sensory input to the driver, but we've got to make sure that, number one, we're safe, that we don't distract people with all this connectivity, but we do take advantage of all the opportunities that are coming at us. So I think, I look at it, my glass is always full, usually with beer, but that's another subject. We have some tremendous opportunities coming towards us. And some of the technology that's been on display here at the show this week is really cutting edge and is coming to your car soon. I think that's where I'm at.
It seems to me that there are kind of two buckets for all this stuff, one of which is, I would just say, convenience. It's many of the things you said. The other is the safety-related stuff, and this has to do with maybe a more rigorous level of performance required. This is where your car and cars within a few hundred yards of you are able to speak to each other. They're not really talking to you, but they're trading information about where they're going, how fast they're going, what direction they're going, and what's going to happen next. The promise of this kind of capability is that if you're in an urban area, for example, and approaching a cross street, your car would know what would traffic on the cross street that you couldn't even see. It's around the corner. Is somebody coming across that intersection in front of you and is not going to stop for that light and will hit you if something doesn't happen? That kind of capability is a big deal in the safety side of this, but that, as you can imagine, demands a very fast, very accurate way of cars speaking to each other. For one thing, they all have to speak the same language regardless of who makes the car. There can't be a connectivity issue where, like your cell phone, all this drops out all of a sudden and you have no signal at all. It needs to be very reliable. So the performance level there seems to me to be considerably higher than it is for this other area, and yet there's a lot of development going on in both areas. Shoma, can you talk at all about that? I know your company works with a number of companies in developing these things.
So I think it's a good point that you make, but I would peel the onion a little further back first. When we talk connectivity and when we talk about 5G and 4G and all that, and you just mentioned it with the coverage, right? Like, it's very disappointing if you have a service and then all of a sudden there's no coverage and then the service doesn't work anymore. Before we fall into the same trap that Kevin said with the autonomous cars, yeah, we're probably hyped out, yeah, and now we're coming back a little bit. Before we talk 5G and V2X on 5G and all that, I think we need to check a little more have we actually maxed out what 4G capabilities are available? And for connected services, can we actually make money with it? Because before we invest into the next technology, I think the first technology needs to get paid off. And if you look at the take rate for connected services right now, it's only after the free trial period is over, it's only 20 or 30%, right? So the business case doesn't work. And I think there is, even though we talk from a technology perspective, where we can develop 5G, and P3 is even a member of the 5G Automotive Alliance, so we're actively engaged in this. But I think we need to first think about how can we leverage the existing technology to actually earn some money with it. And I think when we talk connectivity, a key thing is over-the-air update or over-the-air connectivity capabilities. Right now, I think it's being used for very simple features, yeah, like remote lock or unlock of a car. And even if you do this, sometimes there's a latency of like up to 20, 30 seconds, yeah, before the little pin on the vehicle pops up. That's not really a good user experience, right? And when I think via the current connectivity and using over the air to really bring some value to it, how can we customize the experience in the vehicle? Yeah, think about like in real-time adjustment of how your navigation system performs in the vehicle due to a software update that gets brought into the vehicle, right? That's not available today. But if you, for example, on Netflix, yeah, don't want to see the intro and you skip over it a few times after that, Netflix will not even offer you the intro anymore. Yeah, we don't have even such features in the vehicle yet. So I think the whole over-the-air capabilities are not yet even explored by the automakers. Another example is I think Tesla is fairly good at some of that stuff. When we had the hurricanes in Florida, you might have read this in the newspaper, they were able to basically extend the battery range on their car by just shooting a software update into the vehicle. Who are the automakers able to do this right now, right? And I think that's where we first need to work on before we talk about all the fancy stuff and fall into the 5G hype and fall into the same trap of, in 2005 it was electrification, right? By 2007 we were all driving electric cars, didn't happen. A couple of years ago we were all autonomous. Today I didn't come with an autonomous car, I came with an Uber, right? So it's my version of autonomous car.
You didn't drive it.
But I think with connectivity and V2X and the whole 5G discussion, I think there's that same trap that's there. And I think first we need to concentrate on making what we have actually business viable and bringing a real value to the customer first.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to what Shyam said about the other communications technologies other than V2X. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for OTA and quite honestly, communication coming the other way from the vehicle back to home again with diagnostics information, prognostics information, and the like. I think we'll see a lot more development of that early on here, and that will drive some of the technologies that will ultimately get used for V2X. Because there's a real need to update the vehicles, as Shamit said, and even in development, increasingly you're going to see vehicle manufacturers using their over-the-air capability to develop the technologies, during the development phase. And so that technology, that easement of communication is going to be critical for the future, I think, of V2X. Maybe just one other comment about the communication dropouts as well. I think that the way we'll see V2X used in the future is as an extension of the sensor technology that we're putting on cars already. I think you can't really allow the vehicle not to be able to operate if communication is denied or if GPS is denied. So the strategies for the advanced safety technologies up to autonomy will be primarily based first on sensors and then with additional information coming from the V2X so they can continue to operate properly and safely even when the communication is denied.
Well, you're raising a fundamental point here, which is connectivity by definition means connecting things. Well, what's the channel? How do you do that? And these days there are kind of two options. One is this DSRC, that's a dedicated short-range communications. This is some spectrum that was set aside years ago specifically so that cars could communicate with each other. And it sat there not being used for a long time because, frankly, the cost of the computing power and technology required to use it was not real attractive. And during that time, cellular service has continued to improve. You know, we all think that 4G is pretty hot stuff, and now 5 is coming along and presenting kind of a real competitive option. And Chris, I know we've talked about this. Maybe you can kind of lay out these two approaches and the pros and cons of each.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the tortoise and the hare. You know, DSRC was out of the gate very quickly because it was promoted more than 15 years now by NHTSA as a way for vehicles to communicate with each other on a separated and segregated band. But over the last few years, there's been significant improvements made with cellular V2X. And before you start thinking that we're going to have to pay for this because you're used to paying a cell phone bill each month, the vision would be that the vehicles would communicate with each other directly without payments, but also could communicate via cell phone towers, you know, in terms of a cloud service and for non-safety critical, non-time critical information like weather conditions and road conditions ahead and so forth. And the improvements that are being made, especially as we move towards 5G, promises to have better performance so that the vehicles will have better coverage, lower latency or faster response between the vehicles. So it promises to have better performance than DSRC, and some of the companies in the telecom industry, including my former employer, Qualcomm, are quite interested in this approach because it can be much more improved over time than DSRC, which is sort of a legacy system. So the vision with cellular V2X is that it can continue to improve, and that most cars in the future are going to have a cellular modem in them anyway, and the addition of the capability for the vehicles to communicate with each other is only going to add a very small amount of extra cost to the vehicle versus if you had to add a DSRC modem to the vehicle. So I think there's good business reasons for considering cellular V2X. I think the time frame is very relevant here. You know, autonomous vehicles are not going to be hitting the marketplace right now. They're going to be a few years into the future, and that's probably at the same sort of time frame that we're beginning to see extensive rollout of connected vehicles using cellular technology. So I think the two can really complement each other. And I think we are beginning to realize more and more the limitations that autonomous vehicles have in that they can't necessarily operate all the time without human intervention, and that cellular or connectivity, I should say, can really help to address some of the challenging use cases that autonomy provides, and that has a real significant business. There's a significant business incentive if you're a fleet operator trying to provide a robo-taxi service, that the vehicles don't stop in the middle of the road because they're hesitant of what to do. So it's not out of the question that you could put in a limited geo-fenced area some very a discrete number of, let's say closed-circuit TV cameras at the intersections that could also communicate with vehicles in your fleet, so that as your vehicles approach some of these challenging locations, they get advanced information about the road conditions, and that they can progress through the intersection with more confidence. And there's a real business value to that in terms of a much better user experience for the passengers and lower cost of operation. So I think it's really happening at the same time that we're going to see autonomy roll out, and it's not going to lag autonomy like it might have been thought of 5 years ago.
Chris, to piggyback on what you said, I mean, we see in China that they have made a very clear decision on cellular V2X. And I would suspect if you look at it, what you mentioned, how the technology is being developed, you basically piggyback on an architecture of an LTE chip, right? And so China is probably promoting the Huawei's and the MediaTeks of in their country to basically use the LTE portfolio that they have for those cellular V2X capabilities, maybe even in order to hedge against players like a Qualcomm entering their market or being dependent on it. And here in the US, I mean, DSRC has been pushed quite a lot by the government, but I think the automakers, when they look at it, they have so much commonality on a semiconductor level between what they do for their regular cell connection and now for their V2X cell connection, that they rather go that route, maybe put 2 antennas on the vehicle, yeah, because you communicate in different ways, but you have to integrate only like basically one type of chipset instead of like integrating a DSRC chip in addition to a regular LTE chip, right? And I think that's where the push and the pull, right, in which direction it goes, comes from. And how it's going to be decided in the US, it's either the government going to mandate it very strongly versus the automakers are basically creating artifacts and implementing it, and then it just starts rolling by itself.
Yeah, but before we talk, oh, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but before we talk only about technology, I think, I don't want to give Shomit too much of a compliment, but I think he was right. We need to find the use cases that you are able to monetize on. And the question is, who is making the money? So in the end, you can say, okay, hardware going to be replaced. So I think then if you go to bigger European cities, there's park light systems. So what Bill mentioned before, you have infrastructure there where where cars are counted. It's big, a lot of steel, a lot of cables, a lot of everything. That might be replaced if you do the data tracking. The question is then in the end, do you really need to have that connected to the vehicle? Because it's like, okay, in the olden days you do people counting, walking in and out of a mall, so where's the traffic flow of the people? Nowadays you say, okay, I put a little chip and track cell phone signals. So everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, even the 15-year-old kids. There's a 5-year-old kid anyhow, no shopper, so not enough money, but mom is there. So, and that's the question, is there anything for the automotive to be significantly gained? So I also agree it's a more evolutionary approach. If there are certain technologies that can be applied, it will come. I think for us as more like a traditional automotive supplier, what was said also before, it's important that we provide the vehicle with more eyes, ears, touch, feel, more sensing technology that then can be used eventually to develop those use cases, those applications that eventually then an automotive supplier or an OEM can benefit from.
I'd like to, if I may, Bill, expand a little bit on some of the comments that have been made. And if I look at the audience, it seems to me that many people are already confused, right, about the terms that are being used here. So I'd like to spend just 1 minute, to maybe try to bring us back to this connectivity topic. When Kevin said that the automotive industry is, I think the term that he used was upside down, right, and has been, let's say, disrupted over the last several years. This is often described as the mega trends that did that to the automotive industry, and many other industries are commonly described as CASE. You may have heard the term. So the C for connectivity, that's where we want to zoom in today. Autonomous is the A, S for shared, and E for electrification. So, and oftentimes, when you talk about one, you think that the others need to go with it or it doesn't work. There's a misconception. Right? So the E, the electrification, is a different megatrend. We don't want to get into that too much today. Can live without the other three. Connectivity can live without the other three. Autonomous will be difficult to live without connectivity, and shared, probably difficult to imagine without connectivity and autonomous. So the tendency that we all have is to cross over from one topic to the next because they are so much interrelated. As far as the automotive industry losing the hype a little bit on, I want to say, autonomy and automated driving. Maybe some of you were in Las Vegas last week, right, for the CES. It's very interesting to see what's going on there. And so where last year, autonomous, big topic. This year, not so much anymore. Everybody now has their, and I don't want to step on anybody's toes here, but ZF, Bosch, Continental, Denso, they all have their shuttles and parts all automated on display. Aptiv has 70 vehicles, a fleet of 70 vehicles in the streets of Las Vegas driving autonomously. So model cities are going up everywhere, right? MCD being one of them. A great initiative, I have to say. K-City is the equivalent just south of Seoul in Korea. We have I want to say, labs in Germany. I want to say a controlled environment. Shomid mentioned this 5G collaboration, right? So absolutely, I would agree, Kevin, that people talk in terms of this Gartner hype cycle. You may have seen this, right? Which describes the life of new technology that gets introduced into the market. So you climb up, the excitement grows and grows, and many people jump onto this. And then you reach what is called the hype peak, or the peak of unrealistic expectations. From there, that's where then really the difference is made. Do you fall into what is called the trough of disillusionment? And one can get the opinion that that is where we are in this autonomous driving space. Connectivity, the opposite is the case. The hype continues. We may be getting close to the peak of the hype. But 5G, and then to make it even more complicated, artificial intelligence as a necessity for level 5 automation, absolutely all over this CES show. Difficult to come up with these definitions. You're probably all familiar with the various levels of autonomous driving. So we distinguish 5 levels. I don't want to lecture here, but I think it's important for people to understand. So this panel talks about autonomous vehicles. What we mean here is driverless vehicles. That is pretty much the highest level of automation. Without getting too technical, you can use hands off for level 3, brain off for level 4, and drive off for level 5. So it gives an understanding of the various categories of autonomy. Connectivity is here, in the sense of, you mentioned it, V2X, vehicles communicating among each other, vehicles communicating with infrastructure. It's here. Cadillac has rolled it out in the CT6. So DSRC, there are two. If you get on, say, YouTube or on the internet, all you have to do if you want to entertain yourself for a day, all you have to type in is DSRC and 5G, and you can read everything about this battle between those technologies. Both do the same. The one is Wi-Fi, DSRC, and the other is cellular-based. So a lot of pros and cons. People argue that the DSRC requires a lot of investment in roadside infrastructure, whereas 5G is just an upgrade of the cellular network that is already around. So I think this is a very, very relevant topic. And the industry collaborates, which is great. We're going to talk about probably some enablers, some inhibitors also, some challenges that we need to overcome.
Well, it seems to me that one of the big attractions for connectivity is the fact that it doesn't care if your car is automated or not. It would work equally well for all cars out there. So that's a pretty big market for starters.
Just to put a little bit of a point on that, though, if you travel throughout Michigan, now we have about 350 going to 500 miles of DSRC installation. So we've taken a very big leap forward in DSRC. But I would also note that if you drive into the UP, they haven't figured out 1G yet. That's right. There's lots of places still in the US and around the world where you can't get connectivity. So to the point that was made earlier, you really have to have robust systems that can interact with the driver without connectivity. The opportunities with connectivity are endless. And the other thing I always tell people is when 11 years ago, I got my first iPhone, I thought this thing is absolutely brilliant. What's an app? I had no idea what an app was. Now when I
What is it?
now when I do something, my first question is there an app for it?
It's a $100 billion business.
And there usually is an app for it, no matter what you're thinking about. So when we move into this connected space, when we do get to, you know, high end of 4G, 5G, I don't think we even know the potential for what we can connect to or what we can see. I think that it's a very bright future. It's a very interesting, and you look around this space here at Automobility, and you see the companies that are coming out of the woodwork with ideas that you just have never thought of. I think that's going to be an interesting 10 years.
So Kevin, to your point, I think what you said about the coverage, right? I think this is very key. We have our booth over there, and you see if you look to the left, we have like a map, and there's like yellow dots on it. We have technology that's called a crowdsourced collection of mobility and connectivity data. So basically, P3 on any given day collects 1.5 billion data points globally. Yeah, we have about 200 million devices, which are cell phones, that have a little software embedded that we have brought in via apps. Yeah? 900 apps are in our portfolio and through our partners. So we get, at any point in the world, for any point in time, a very good understanding of what the coverage is, 2G, 3G, 4G, and also what the usage pattern is. Yeah? If people make just phone calls, if they use data. And I think this helps to map out, of course, some of the spots where there's not good coverage. And also it helps to develop new connectivity services, because everybody probably from your navigation knows that you can select the shortest route or the fastest one, right? But how often have you picked the route that has the best connectivity so your phone call doesn't get dropped on the way? Right? That's, I think, an add-on service that can be made available by understanding where the coverage is or not. And the application of that goes even further. It's not only like we're doing benchmarks, for example, for automakers and for carriers to understand where they are, but when it comes to safety critical technology like a FirstNet response system like we have in the US, yeah, to understand how good is the coverage and which carrier should actually be taken. Or you could even use this to optimize ride-sharing services to basically determine where are better pickup places, what is the best routing, etc. So there's a lot of capabilities that are possible, and we're happy to showcase this to whoever is interested, how we collect the data and how we basically process it and turn it into use cases.
Without getting too far away from the connectivity topic that we're here to listen to, I would push back a little bit on the idea that autonomy was dead at CES this year. What you really saw was a little bit less emphasis specifically on automated driving, but a lot of emphasis on AI and its little brother, machine learning, and the other nuts and bolts of getting autonomy done. So those are going to be critical to making autonomous vehicles work, is if all the bits and pieces that need to make it work, including connectivity, are well supported by the technologies. And now you see AI, at CES you saw AI embedded in every little thing. And we're going to need that technology to make the connectivity work to achieve the functions and the applications that we've talked about here.
Chris?
Just very quick. Sorry, Chris. I don't want to be on the record for saying that autonomy is dead. I have a few years left to work. So, I was talking about the hype cycle, and the notion that we have that we're getting to the peak of the hype. You will have autonomous vehicles.
Oh, yes.
At a certain level of autonomy.
I think,
Chris,
when people talk about how connectivity can augment autonomous operation, they tend to think of V2X. But another area to think about is teleoperation or remote control operation. So a lot of these autonomous vehicles are going to be parts of fleets with a fleet operator, a control center for customer care. Those vehicles can have, especially with 5G, but even today, it's possible to do remote control operation. And that may be very useful if the vehicle sensors aren't competent enough to know how to progress in a given situation. So that's another use case for where connectivity can really help to augment autonomous operation. I think, I don't want to be too negative, but I think there also needs to be more attention given. As we think about 5G, we're putting a lot of expectation into what 5G can provide. And again, that's probably the definition of hype. But if 5G works as well as we think it will be because you have a very dense network of towers, much closer together than you're used to seeing today with cell phone towers. They'll be outside your house in many parts of the city. And I think we need to think, are there any health effects that this may cause? Because I've not seen any real strong arguments to say what the health effects are of proliferation of 5G, especially in dense neighborhoods. And any technology, when you scale it, creates new problems. I can't think of any technology that's been created by man that hasn't created problems itself when it's scaled. And so we need to be aware of these potential issues.
This sort of raises this regulatory issue. I mean, this all sounds great, but the undercurrent is that somebody has to figure out exactly what the rules are for this sort of stuff, how the technology works. For one thing, this ability of any vehicle to talk to any other vehicle, regardless of who made that other vehicle, certainly, to me, is a very loud and clear signal that, first of all, before we get too far down the road, everybody has to agree on what the language is and the protocols and tons of standards, and which sounds like the death knell for any innovation because it takes forever to get these standards put together. What's the reality of that situation? I mean, is this going to ultimately dictate how fast all these wonderful ideas come to fruition, or what?
Yeah, so DSRC again is being rolled out, right, for high volume production vehicles by more than one manufacturer. Yeah, so they're not waiting around for 5G; they're pushing it out now. And so the early adoption, right, the deployment to get the technology into people's hands so that they can take the benefits from it is very critical. So you have, what I mentioned, GM, of course, already in the market with DSRC. Toyota also strongly promoting this. And then we have the European automotive industry, and this is really not only the automotive industry, right? It's telecommunications and back-end service companies. So this is a broad collaboration in the industry, and of course everybody understands it's not ideal if you have dual standards. Yeah, this is a global initiative, of course, right? So if I say it appears to me that if you bank on DSRC now, it's a brave decision. Yeah, but it is what it will probably take to get that excitement into the market while 5G development continues, right? 5G is not there yet. China is strongly pushing 5G. Europe, for the most part, pushing 5G. Yeah, but you see how inconsistent this is. Volkswagen in the Golf in Europe, right, is also launching DSRC in their vehicles. Yeah, the Audi brand doesn't. Yeah, Audi is part of the consortium that develops 5G, right? So this is how divided this community is and how difficult that discussion.
Now, ultimately, does the industry have to pick one or the other, or can you just say, do whichever one you want? It's ultimately data, and once it gets up into the cloud, we don't care, what signal sent it.
I think the earlier point about policy, regulation, and standards, I believe they will be the gating issues for the deployment of these technologies. There's a lot of work going on in the US between the states and the federal government, usually the Department of Transport. But there's a lot of work also going on internationally between Europe, China, and the US to try and harmonize those regulations. I work for the government, and I am not particularly hopeful that that's going to happen anytime soon. I think it's going to be a long and arduous road. If you look at safety standards between vehicles coming from Europe to the US and the US to Europe, they are certainly not harmonious. And there's billions and billions of dollars spent every year to convert and homogenize European vehicles that come into the US market and vice versa. So The hope is, and the activity that's going on is to try and make it such that we can all agree on standards, but I think those are going to have to be very broad, to your point, to say that, you know, you can use any method of communication that you like, and this is the net result. But that's a wish more than a hope.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that the market needs to drive things, because nowadays every app that you want to have, it needs to run on an Android system, on on all the different, at least major carriers. So that's, I think, the regulation. If you have to wait, you're right. You wait forever. The one thing which I think we are in the whole discussion here missing a bit, and because I'm still also coming from who can monetize on it, I believe it's more, when we talk connectivity, it's more not about the different car makers. It's more between the phone companies and the automotive industry. It's the same thing like when you talk about CES and where we are sitting here. So I think that's the bigger problem. The question is in the end an application that finds you a better parking spot or reserves it for you on your cell phone, and does Apple make the money, or whoever created the app, or is it Ford or GM or whoever else? And I think that's the bigger problem, and especially when we talk connectivity, I'm not sure if the automotive industry will win that fight, because the infrastructure, and especially also 5G, is more relevant for everybody that carries a cell phone. It is also relevant for the auto industry. So that's why I say it's going to be an evolutionary effect, and you need to find those niche solutions, like you described before, where you say, okay, we have a controlled fleet of, I don't know, logistic trucks or forklifts or something like that, where you have a special application, where then this additional technology, the additional data can help you to fulfill that feature. And out of that, it might grow into more popular use. Sorry, it's just that I'm a little, even me being an automotive guy, I don't want to be the negative person, but I believe that's the bigger fight.
So I think that's a perfect point. And Bill, when we talked in preparation here, you said share some stories, right? And what you guys are doing. So I don't want to come across as making this an ad story for P3 here. But one of the initiatives that we have going on right now is what I would call developing vehicle mesh technologies, or car mesh technologies. And we're currently in discussion with a major global OEM to form a joint venture between this OEM and P3 to develop those type of technologies. And I think it ties into the monetization topic that you have, Like when you think about what could be use cases of such a mesh technology, where the car is not just a singular element, but it's part of a network, right? And you, for example, you could basically have different strategies of how to reduce your cost for software updates. Think about, instead of sending a software to every vehicle, via your cell phone connection, think about you send it just to you in your car, and then you send it to all of you